What if I told you that the people who appear the least useful are often the most free? Not the loud rebels, not the hyperproductive grinders posting motivational quotes at 5 a.m., not the office hero answering emails during dinner. The truly free person is usually invisible. They are the employee who somehow avoids meaningless meetings, the co-worker nobody asks for favors anymore, the person who mysteriously has time, energy, hobbies, peace, while everyone else is drowning. And here is the terrifying part. They are not lucky. They engineered it. Most people believe competence creates freedom. But in the modern digital economy, competence often becomes a prison. The better you perform, the more labor you attract. The faster you solve problems, the more problems are handed to you. The more dependable you become, the less your life belongs to you. And eventually, your identity becomes nothing more than a public utility for other people's convenience. Tonight, we are going to dissect one of the most taboo survival strategies of the modern age. Strategic incompetence, not laziness, not failure, not weakness, but the deliberate art of becoming unavailable for low-value demands. Because the people who master this game understand a brutal truth. If you prove you can carry everything, society will make sure you do. And by the end of this video, you may start seeing high performance very differently. The year is 2026. Human beings have become productivity machines. Every app tracks your efficiency. Every company measures output. Every algorithm rewards responsiveness. We live inside an economy obsessed with optimization, faster replies, faster workflows, faster content, faster results. And at first glance, this seems admirable until you notice something disturbing. The reward for efficiency is rarely freedom. It is usually more work. Think carefully about this. When a worker finishes tasks early, what happens? Do they get more rest? More autonomy? More peace? No, they get additional responsibilities. The efficient employee becomes the emergency solution for everyone else's incompetence. Suddenly they are fixing spreadsheets, training coworkers, handling crises, solving technical issues, responding to quick questions all day long. And slowly, their own life disappears beneath the weight of endless accessibility. This is the hidden tax on competence. Nobody warns you about it because society romanticizes reliability. The dependable one, the hard worker, the team player. But these labels often become chains disguised as compliments. Because the moment people discover you are capable, they begin outsourcing their problems onto your nervous system. And the modern workplace is designed to exploit this psychologically, especially digital work. In industrial labor, productivity had physical limits, but knowledge work has no ceiling. There's always another email, another update, another revision, another call, another Slack notification. Your competence creates infinite demand, and this creates a horrifying paradox. The more useful you become, the less control you have over your own time. Now here's where most people make a catastrophic mistake. They become generalists. They try to be good at everything. Answering messages, organizing documents, scheduling meetings, troubleshooting systems, managing emotions, helping coworkers. And because they can do many things reasonably well, they become the organizational dumping ground for everything nobody else wants to do. This is where burnout begins, not through dramatic collapse, but through thousands of tiny thefts. Tiny thefts of attention, tiny thefts of energy, tiny thefts of focus, until one day you realize you no longer belong to yourself. You belong to requests, And this is why specializing ability becomes powerful. Because strategically incapable people create boundaries automatically. Notice something strange. The person who is bad with spreadsheets is never asked to update reports. The person who never checks messages stops receiving constant interruptions. The person who can't organize events properly is mysteriously excluded from future planning. Incompetence redirects labor. And for the first time, you begin to understand something uncomfortable. Society does not distribute work fairly. It distributes work toward the path of least resistance, meaning the more available you appear, the more you will be consumed. But there is an even darker layer to this, because many people secretly build their identity around being needed, and that addiction keeps them trapped forever. But later in this video, we are going to expose why being indispensable may actually be the most dangerous position in modern society. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Most people misunderstand weaponized incompetence. They think it is stupidity, manipulation, immaturity, laziness. Sometimes it is. But strategic incompetence is something entirely different. It is controlled disengagement. It is a deliberate refusal to become permanently responsible for low-value burdens. There is a major psychological difference between someone who cannot perform a task and someone who chooses not to perform it efficiently enough to become the default candidate forever. That distinction changes everything, because expectations are built through repeated proof. Every time you solve a problem quickly, you train people to return to you. You become the permanent shortcut. And human beings love shortcuts, especially when they cost them nothing. This is why hypercompetent people slowly become trapped inside invisible servitude, not because others are evil, but because efficiency attracts dependency. Now listen carefully. Strategic incompetence is not about destroying your career. It is about protecting your cognitive territory. The key is selective failure. You remain exceptional at your core obsession, your craft, your specialty, your leverage. But outside that territory, you become surprisingly mediocre, slow with administrative clutter, terrible with unnecessary bureaucracy, unreliable for emotional labor, confusing during pointless coordination tasks. And suddenly people stop volunteering you for nonsense. This is the art of curated performance. Notice how powerful people behave. The elite rarely do everything themselves. In fact, many powerful individuals intentionally appear detached from operational chaos, not because they are incapable, but because accessibility destroys hierarchy. The more reachable you are, the less control you possess. And here's where the average worker becomes psychologically trapped. They confuse usefulness with value. But usefulness often lowers your freedom. If everybody can constantly access your time, then your life becomes public property. Now here comes a dangerous concept most people never realize. Failure can be directional, meaning you can fail upward. Imagine two employees. The first one instantly handles every small task thrown at them. The second one is brilliant at high-level strategic work, but mysteriously terrible at tedious admin tasks. Who ends up buried in endless maintenance work? The first person. Who ends up protected for higher-level thinking? The second. This happens constantly in corporations. People who become associated with operational friction eventually get bypassed for trivial requests. And bypassing creates silence. Silence creates time. Time creates leverage. And leverage creates autonomy. But there is an even deeper psychological mechanism happening underneath all of this. Human beings avoid friction. If interacting with you requires too much effort for low-value tasks, people unconsciously search for alternatives. And that is the true purpose of strategic incompetence: to remove yourself as the easiest option, not through aggression, not through confrontation, but through behavioral conditioning. However, there's a line you must never cross, because if your incompetence touches your core value, your reputation collapses completely. And in the next section, we are going to break down exactly how to engineer this balance without destroying your status. Because one wrong move can turn strategic incompetence into career suicide. Your reputation is an operating system. Once people categorize you mentally, they stop reevaluating you constantly. This means one repeated behavior can define years of future expectations. Most people accidentally build reputations that imprison them. You must build one that protects you. The first step is identifying high-clutter tasks. These are activities with near zero return on investment, tasks that consume energy without increasing your freedom, wealth, creativity, or strategic position. Examples: endless formatting, pointless meetings, administrative babysitting, unpaid emotional support, emergency troubleshooting for avoidable problems, constant availability. These tasks create the illusion of productivity while draining your life force. And here is the brutal reality. Many organizations survive by converting highly conscientious people into human infrastructure. Once you understand this, your perspective changes forever. You stop asking, "How can I help more?" and begin asking, "What exactly is this costing me?" Because every commitment consumes future attention. Now, this leads to one of the most important techniques in strategic incompetence: the first-time fail. This method is terrifyingly effective. Here's how it works. The first time someone asks you to perform a low-value, recurring task, you do it badly enough that they hesitate to ask again. Not catastrophically, not dramatically, just inefficiently enough to create resistance, slow responses, confused execution, visible friction. Humans are pattern recognition machines. If a task feels inefficient through you, they seek smoother alternatives. And eventually they stop coming to you entirely. Now notice the psychological elegance of this. You are not refusing directly. You are reshaping expectations, because direct refusal often triggers confrontation, but perceived incompetence triggers reassignment, and reassignment is socially smoother. This is how people quietly escape endless obligations without open conflict. But remember, your core competence must remain undeniable. This is critical. The goal is not becoming weak. The goal is becoming surgically selective. Think of a sniper rifle, not a machine gun. Your energy should fire only toward high-leverage targets. Everything else becomes strategically blurred. Now here is where the true masters separate themselves from amateurs. They create asymmetrical identities, meaning highly competent in one rare domain, strangely incapable everywhere else. This creates mystique. People begin associating you with depth rather than availability, and depth commands respect differently. Availability lowers perceived scarcity. Scarcity increases perceived value. This principle exists everywhere. Luxury brands, elite consultants, high-status creators, powerful executives. The less accessible they become, the more valuable their attention appears. Now pause for a second. Think about the people constantly overwhelmed in your life. They are usually the ones who prove they could handle everything. And that brings us to one of the darkest truths in modern social dynamics. People often punish competence with dependency, not intentionally, but systematically. And if you never interrupt that cycle, you become consumed by it. But the next phase goes even deeper. Because strategic incompetence is not merely about avoiding tasks. It is about transforming yourself from a controllable employee into an autonomous entity. And that psychological shift changes everything. Most people live reactively. Their schedules belong to notifications. Their moods belong to emails. Their attention belongs to demands. They believe this is normal. But autonomy begins the moment you stop functioning as an endlessly available resource. This is the Machiavellian pivot. You stop seeing yourself as a team player and begin seeing yourself as sovereign territory. That sounds selfish, until you realize modern systems survive by fragmenting your attention. Every interruption steals cognitive momentum, and cognitive momentum is one of the most valuable assets in existence. Deep thinking requires uninterrupted time. Creativity requires mental silence. Originality requires psychological distance from chaos. But the average person lives inside perpetual interruption. Their nervous system becomes permanently reactive, and reactive people are easier to control. Now here is where strategic incompetence becomes socially disruptive. Because once you remove yourself as the automatic solution, other people are forced to adapt. They find alternatives. They develop competence. They solve problems independently. This creates temporary discomfort, but it also exposes a hidden truth. Many dependencies were never necessary to begin with. They simply existed because you made yourself available. Availability breeds reliance. Reliance breeds expectation. Expectation breeds entitlement. And entitlement eventually destroys your freedom. Now notice something fascinating. The people most protective of their time are often perceived as powerful, not because they work less, but because they control access. Access is status, and unrestricted access lowers perceived value. This is why many high-status individuals cultivate selective unavailability, delayed responses, narrow focus, strict boundaries, not because they are cruel, but because constant accessibility destroys strategic concentration. And concentration is a foundation of meaningful achievement. Now, we must address the ethical question. Is strategic incompetence manipulative? Possibly, but so is modern labor culture. Because corporations constantly optimize human behavior for maximum extraction. Every productivity system attempts to capture more of your time. Every platform fights for your attention. Every workplace rewards overextension until burnout arrives. You are already inside a psychological war for your cognitive resources. Strategic incompetence is simply defensive architecture. It is saying, my attention is not public property. And this becomes even more important in the attention economy, because attention is now more valuable than physical labor. Whoever controls your focus controls your life trajectory. That is why reclaiming time feels almost revolutionary today. But here is the danger. Once you taste autonomy, you become intolerant of meaningless obligations. And society does not always reward that transformation. Some people will resent your boundaries. Others will interpret your unavailability as arrogance, because your refusal forces them to confront their own lack of boundaries. And that makes people uncomfortable. But remember this carefully. People benefiting from your exhaustion will rarely support your liberation. And there is still one final problem we need to discuss. Because even after you successfully reclaim your time, there is a hidden force constantly trying to drag you back into overuse. Something called competence creep. And if you do not understand it, everything collapses. Time is not merely hours. Time is identity. Whatever consistently receives your attention eventually shapes who you become. This is why reclaimed hours are so powerful. Most people never experience uninterrupted ownership of their own mind. Imagine waking up without immediate demands, working deeply instead of reactively, creating instead of constantly responding, thinking clearly instead of surviving chaos. This is what strategic incompetence protects, not laziness, mental sovereignty. Because when your schedule belongs entirely to others, your future slowly stops belonging to you. Now, let us discuss the long-term rewards. Deep work, creative expansion, skill mastery, physical recovery, emotional stability, psychological clarity. All of these require protected time. And protected time only exists when boundaries become structural, not emotional. This is where most people fail. They rely on willpower, but willpower collapses under repeated social pressure. Strategic incompetence creates automatic resistance. It turns your reputation into a shield. And once that shield solidifies, life changes dramatically. Fewer interruptions, fewer random obligations, fewer draining responsibilities, more silence. And silence is where powerful identities are built. But now we arrive at the final danger, competence creep. This happens when you accidentally demonstrate efficiency in an area you intentionally escaped. One successful performance can reactivate expectations instantly. Remember, humans track patterns. If you suddenly become amazing at organizing events after months of appearing terrible at it, people will update their internal model of you, and suddenly the requests return. This is why strategic incompetence requires consistency, not perfection. Consistency. The goal is control predictability. You remain selectively brilliant, but operationally elusive. Now understand something important. This strategy is not for everyone. Some people genuinely enjoy hypercooperation. Others derive identity from constant service. But if you constantly feel psychologically invaded by obligations, this philosophy may feel like oxygen, because beneath all of this lies a deeper existential question. Who owns your life? You? Or everyone who can successfully demand your attention? The modern world trains people to become infinitely reachable, but infinite reachability destroys individuality. You cannot hear your own thoughts while living inside constant interruption. And maybe that is why so many people feel spiritually exhausted despite appearing productive. They are overused, overaccessed, overobligated, overavailable. They became excellent servants to systems that never intended to free them. But the person who strategically limits access, who deliberately curates expectations, who protects their cognitive territory, slowly becomes something rare, self-directed. And self-direction is one of the highest forms of modern power, because freedom is not merely financial. Freedom is deciding where your attention goes. Freedom is choosing when you are useful. Freedom is knowing your value without becoming consumed by everyone else's convenience. And perhaps the most dangerous realization of all is this: the world does not automatically reward the hardest worker. It often rewards a person who best protects their energy. So maybe being bad at certain things is not weakness after all. Maybe it is survival. Maybe it is intelligence. Or maybe it is the final rebellion against a world that profits from your permanent availability. Now I want to ask you something. What is one task, responsibility, or expectation in your life that secretly drains your energy, but you still keep saying yes to? Write it in the comments. Because the first step toward autonomy is recognizing where your time is being stolen.